she couldn't afford her son's medicine. The man behind her changed everything. The pharmacist slid the small white box across the counter, and Mara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The number on the receipt glowed like a verdict she wasn't prepared to hear: $237. She looked down at the crumpled bills in her palm, then back up at the fluorescent lit shelves behind the counter, then at her son Theo standing beside her in his orange hoodie, his small face unreadable, his brown eyes fixed somewhere on the floor. He was 10 years old and already knew how to pretend he hadn't heard something that hurt. That broke her more than anything else in the world. She counted the money again, as if somehow the bills had multiplied when she wasn't looking. $114. That was everything she had until Friday. Rent was already 3 weeks late. The electricity had been disconnected once this month, and she had managed to scrape it back on only because her neighbor Mrs. Calloway had quietly folded $60 into her hand without making eye contact. Mara had cried in the stairwell for 20 minutes after that, and then washed her face and made Theo macaroni and cheese and helped him with his spelling homework, because that was what you did. You kept going. But Theo's asthma had gotten worse this winter. The inhaler he'd been using had stopped working the way it should, and Dr. Reyes had written him a new prescription, a stronger combination medication that would help keep his airways open through the night. Last week, Mara had woken to the sound of Theo wheezing so badly she had carried him to the bathroom, run the hot shower, and sat on the cold tile floor with him for 40 minutes while the steam did its imperfect work. She had held him against her chest and felt the effort in every one of his breaths, and she had made herself a silent promise that she would get him the medication no matter what it took. But $237. She hadn't imagined it would cost that much. She had called the insurance company 3 times this week, had been put on hold for a combined total of 2 hours and 19 minutes, and had finally been told by a calm, indifferent voice that the new medication wasn't covered under her plan and that the appeals process could take 4 to 6 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks. Theo didn't have 4 to 6 weeks of bad nights ahead of him. She couldn't watch him struggle to breathe for another month while paperwork traveled through the postal system of bureaucratic indifference. So here she stood, at the pharmacy counter, in her green coat that she'd bought from a thrift store 3 winters ago, holding $114 and the quiet, suffocating weight of being a mother who couldn't fix this. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the idea that one stranger can change everything, please take a moment right now to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear a story like this today, and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. We tell stories that matter here, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing who's part of this community. Mara told the pharmacist she needed a moment. She stepped to the side of the counter and stood very still, doing the math she already knew wouldn't work. She thought briefly about her credit card, the one with the $17 remaining balance. She thought about calling her sister in Phoenix, who had her own problems, her own rent, her own children. She thought about putting the medication on layaway. Could you even do that at a pharmacy? She thought about all the things that weren't going to work, and she kept her face very calm because Theo was right beside her, and she would not let him see her fall apart in a pharmacy on a Tuesday afternoon. She was looking at the box on the counter, this small, unremarkable white box that represented the difference between her son sleeping soundly and her son fighting for air, when she heard a voice behind her, not directed at her, not unkind, just a man, somewhere in his early 40s, dressed in a blue blazer over a dark red shirt, speaking quietly to the pharmacist and asking if there was a problem, because it looked like the lady at the counter might need some help. Mara turned around. She hadn't even heard him step up. He was tall, with short, dark hair, and the kind of face that looked like it had been through something, lived in and genuine, not the carefully smoothed surface of someone who had never had to worry. He wasn't looking at her with pity. That was the first thing she noticed. He was looking at her the way you look at another person when you recognize something. When you see in someone else a version of a struggle you already understand. She told him she was fine. She said it the way every person says it when they are absolutely not fine, quickly, with a brief, pressed smile that didn't reach her eyes. He didn't press. He didn't perform the kind of aggressive charity that makes the recipient feel small. He simply asked the pharmacist what the total was, in the same even, conversational tone he might use to ask what time the store closed. When the pharmacist told him, he nodded once, the way a man nods when a thing is settled in his mind, and he handed over his card before Mara had fully processed what was happening. She said no. She said it immediately, stepping forward, shaking her head, telling him she couldn't accept that, she didn't know him, it was too much. He listened to all of it patiently, without interrupting, and when she was finished, he said something that she would think about for a long time afterward. He said that someone had once done something for his family when they needed it most, and that the only way to repay a debt like that is to pass it forward when you have the chance to see it. He said he could see it right now, and he would very much like to take the chance. Theo was watching from beside the counter. His small face had changed. He was looking at this stranger with the careful attention of a child who has been quiet through adult conversations for long enough to understand more than adults realize. And when the pharmacist processed the transaction and slid the white box across the counter, Theo reached out and picked it up with both hands, as if it were something sacred. Mara looked at her son holding his medication, and something came undone inside her chest. She pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment, just a moment. Then she thanked him, and her voice came out rough and unsteady, and she didn't try to smooth it over. Some gratitude doesn't fit inside composed words. The man, whose name she learned was Adrian, told her not to thank him. He said that her son was going to be fine. He said it with the quiet certainty of someone who needed it to be true as much as she did, and she didn't understand why yet. But she would. They ended up standing in the parking lot outside the pharmacy for nearly 40 minutes, which neither of them had planned. Theo sat on a low concrete wall nearby, turning the box of medication over and over in his hands, and Mara talked to Adrian the way you sometimes talk to strangers when the guard has been brought down by something extraordinary. She told him about the insurance, about the appeals process, about the wheezing in the night. He listened without performing sympathy, just listened, the way people listen when they actually want to know. And then he told her about his daughter. Her name was Priya. She had been 8 years old, and she had had a heart condition that no one had caught early enough. He and his wife at the time had been young, barely keeping things together financially, working 2 jobs between them. There had been a night in a hospital waiting room when a doctor had sat across from them and told them that Priya would need a surgery that wasn't covered, that the out-of-pocket cost was staggering, and that they had options to consider. He remembered the particular quality of silence in that room. He remembered how the fluorescent lights had hummed. He remembered that he had looked at his wife and thought, this is the moment where everything either breaks or holds. A nurse, a woman he had never seen before and never saw again, had come to them an hour later. She had handed them a folded piece of paper with the name of a charitable foundation, a phone number, and a personal note in her own handwriting explaining who to ask for. She had said only that she had seen too many families like theirs, and that she wanted them to know there was help. That phone call had led to another, which had led to a grant that covered nearly everything. Priya had had her surgery. She was 14 now and played on her school's soccer team and complained that her father texted too many memes. Mara laughed at that, a real surprised laugh that felt strange and good in her throat. And then she cried a little, just briefly, the way you cry when a story ends better than you were braced for. Adrian said that he had spent the years since then looking for the moments the nurse had described, the families like his, the places where a small thing could change the trajectory of everything. He said he had learned that these moments were everywhere if you were paying attention. Most people weren't paying attention. He had decided to always be paying attention. Theo had wandered back over during this part of the conversation and was standing beside his mother with his hands in the pocket of his hoodie, listening with that careful child attention of his. He asked Adrian if Priya was a good soccer player. Adrian said she was absolutely terrible at it, but had never once considered quitting, and that this was worth more than natural talent. Theo seemed to find this deeply satisfying and nodded as if a long-standing question had been resolved. Before they parted, Adrian asked Mara if she had heard of the patient assistance program that the medications manufacturer offered, a program that could bring the monthly cost of the prescription down to nearly nothing for families below a certain income threshold. She hadn't. No one had told her. Not the insurance company, not the doctor's office, not the first pharmacist she'd spoken to. Adrian had learned about it years ago through the same journey that had led him here and pulled it up on his phone and wrote down the number for her on the back of a pharmacy receipt. She called the number the next morning, a Wednesday, sitting at the kitchen table while Theo ate cereal before school. The hold music was the same generic piano loop as every other hold music in America, and she listened to it for 11 minutes, and then a real person answered. The application process took 20 minutes. The representative was kind, unhurried, thorough. She explained that Mara qualified, that the approval could come through within 5 to 7 business days, and that in the meantime they could issue a temporary assistance card that could be used at the pharmacy today. Mara sat at the kitchen table after she hung up and did not move for a long time. She just sat there in the yellow morning light coming through the window she'd been meaning to get new curtains for, and she let herself feel the specific and particular relief of a weight being lifted that you have carried for so long you had almost forgotten what it felt like to stand without it. That night, Theo slept through until morning without waking once. She checked on him at 2 in the morning anyway, standing in his doorway and listening to the even, untroubled rhythm of his breathing in the dark. She stayed there longer than she needed to. She was not sure she would ever stop marveling at the sound of her son breathing easily. The weeks that followed were not suddenly easy. Life does not transform overnight, and the rent was still late, and the credit card balance was still there, and the job she worked, managing inventory for a small distribution company, paid enough to survive, but not enough to feel safe. But something had shifted, and not just practically. Something had shifted in the way Mara moved through the world. She began paying attention differently. She began noticing the family at the grocery store who stood at the register counting change, the older woman waiting at the bus stop in the rain without an umbrella, the young man at the laundromat who put his last quarters in and then realized he had no soap. She didn't have much to offer, but she had something, usually. Enough to hand over a travel-size detergent packet, to offer to share her umbrella for half a block, to smile at the register and say quietly that she'd cover the difference. She thought about the nurse whose name Adrian had never learned. She thought about Mrs. Calloway folding $60 into her hand without making eye contact. She thought about the way kindness travels, not in straight lines, not in ways you can trace or quantify, but in ripples that move outward through people's lives and change the temperature of the world they pass through. Theo started doing better in school that spring. His teachers noted that he seemed more focused, more energetic. His asthma, well managed now, stopped defining the edges of his life. He joined an after-school robotics club and came home on Thursdays talking so fast that Mara had to ask him to slow down twice before she could follow what he was saying. She loved those Thursdays. She loved the particular quality of a child who has been given room to become interested in things. She ran into Adrian once more, about 3 months later, at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the pharmacy. He was sitting alone with a laptop and a cup of coffee, and he looked up when she came in and recognized her immediately. They talked for half an hour. He asked about Theo. She told him about the robotics club, and he looked genuinely pleased, the way a person looks when they learn that a bet they made on a good outcome paid off. She told him about the patient assistance program, that it had been renewed, that the monthly cost now was $8. He said that was good to hear. She said that was an understatement. She had been thinking, she told him, about what he'd said in the parking lot that day, about paying attention, about looking for the moments. She had been trying to do that. She told him about the laundromat, the bus stop, the grocery store. He listened with that same quality of attention she had noticed the first day. And when she finished, he said that she had understood something that took some people their whole lives to understand, and some people never got to at all. She asked him what that was. He said that most people wait until they have enough before they start giving. He said the truth he'd learned was that enough never arrives if you're waiting for it. The giving is what creates the enough. She thought about that on the walk home, and for many days after. This story is for every parent who has stood at a counter counting money that wasn't quite enough, for every stranger who chose to pay attention, for every small act that changed everything for someone else without the giver ever fully knowing. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of a moment of kindness you gave or received, or if it made you want to be the person who pays attention, please like this video right now, share it with someone who needs to feel this today, and leave a comment below. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people, and more people reaching these stories means more moments of recognition, more ripples. There is a particular kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. It doesn't have a soundtrack or a moment of cinematic triumph. It looks like a woman in a green thrift store coat standing at a pharmacy counter, counting bills she already knows won't be enough, and not leaving, staying, trying to figure out the next step even when the next step isn't visible. That is the courage that holds the world together. Quiet, unwitnessed, relentless, unremarkable to everyone except the child standing beside you in an orange hoodie who is learning, without knowing he's learning it, what it looks like to refuse to give up on someone you love. Theo would be 16 when he first really understood what that day had meant. He would be sitting in a high school health class of all places during a unit on community resources, and the teacher would mention patient assistance programs, and something would unlock in his memory. The pharmacy, the white box, the man in the blue blazer, his mother's face when she pressed her hand over her mouth. He would come home that evening and ask her to tell him the whole story, not the version she had softened for him, but the real one, and she would sit with him at the kitchen table in the same yellow light and tell him everything: the insurance, the hold music, the $114, the parking lot. He would be quiet for a while after that. Then he would ask if she knew what had happened to Adrian. She would tell him that she ran into him occasionally, that they had kept a loose, warm contact over the years. A message at the holidays, a brief exchange when something reminded one of them of that day. She would tell him that Adrian was still paying attention, still looking for the moments. She would tell him that Priya was in college now, studying sports medicine, still terrible at soccer. Theo would smile at that, and then he would say something that she would write down afterward in the small journal she kept in her nightstand, because she wanted to keep it exactly as he said it. He would say, "I want to be the kind of person who pays for the medicine." She would look at her son, this boy who had grown into someone thoughtful and steady, who had come so far from the child wheezing in a bathroom full of steam, and she would feel something that didn't have a perfect name, something between pride and gratitude and the bittersweet recognition that you have done something right without ever being entirely sure how. She would tell him that he already was. Before you go, drop a comment below and tell us, has a stranger ever shown you unexpected kindness? Or have you ever been the person who stepped in for someone else? We read every single comment, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Some moments are small from the outside. A transaction at a pharmacy counter, a man stepping forward, a card handed over. But inside those moments, entire futures are decided. Theo grows up breathing easily. A mother learns to look for the moments. A debt that can't be repaid gets passed forward into the world like a stone dropped in still water, rings moving outward in every direction, touching shores that the original stone never saw. The nurse whose name Adrian never knew is somewhere in the world right now, or her memory is, still traveling. Still touching lives she set in motion without knowing it. Still being thanked in pharmacy parking lots and kitchen tables and high school conversations and small journals kept in nightstands. That is how kindness works. Not in straight lines. In ripples, moving outward. Always moving outward. And somewhere right now, in a pharmacy, in a grocery line, in a laundromat, in a parking lot, there is a moment waiting, small, unremarkable, easy to miss, where someone is counting money that isn't quite enough, and the person behind them is about to decide whether to pay attention. We hope they pay attention. We hope you do too.